Yeah, put some of those things. Oh, no, those. I don't think fourth and sixth period. Right. Let us begin. So I collected the jungle yesterday. I got most of them solved and graded. And oh, we're there. I'm looking at the test for Friday. I'm always behind, for which Luke and I figured out who to blame, and they will be punished. James. It's James. It's James. One simple job. Keep me on time. He failed miserably. Did we get to this? Yes. I don't think. Very good. Anybody else? Not doing it? Yeah.
I was looking for
Oh, yeah. You got the jungle. Get it? I made it out 20 and then I doubled it in the grade book.
What?
Yes. I'm doubling this in the grade book, the jungle. I don't know why, I just decided. All right, so we got here. What treaty ended? What treaty ended the Spanish-American War? 1898. How much money did the United States pay for the Philippines? To make it look like it wasn't a war of conquest. What amendment said Cuba would be independent? Yeah, independent. And Teddy Roosevelt would order the U.S. Navy to attack what Spanish colony? Yeah, the Philippines. And what battleship? Well, obsolescence battleship blew up. The Maine, the poor Maine. Has there ever been a battleship Montana?
There was gonna be, but then they stopped.
There was going to be a Montana. They didn't make it. I know. You sad? And what else? Do we have cereal?
What?
All right. What else? Where are we at here? So we got this. Did I show you this picture? Did we talk about this? All right, let's get to the next thing. Oh, who called this war a splendid little war? Oh, yeah, John Hay, the Secretary of State. And the war will get less pleasant very soon. Here's another cartoon. I don't think I should. Did I show you this? Can we talk about it at all? I think I just popped it up. So let me show you this really quick. Here's another one of these cartoons. And it's so important to see the way they treated the people who at first were liberating and saving. So here's McKinley, like a tired and obviously hardworking, like a school teacher, like an elementary school teacher. And you notice he is sacrificing. He's hot and miserable, but he's sacrificing to teach. Look how they draw Puerto Rico, Philippines, Hawaii, and Cuba. Look at the faces, look how they draw. I mean, now it is meant to, that goes back to justifying slavery, justifying Jim Crow laws, justifying imperialism. And so this is the most racist time in American history. But one more thing, can you read the box? Remember I showed you Pears soap and those ads were a bunch of them? That's kind of fitting that idea that only, and it said the United States, but it was racialized. Whites civilized enough to teach other people to be clean, which was shockingly untrue and a big, huge lie. But that chose to justify this imperialism. And so there's going to be a large and very vocal anti-imperialist league. They were opposed to the war, but really opposed to taking the Philippines. Samuel Gompers, the head of the AFL. Mark Twain, one of the most famous authors in American history. Carnegie actually offered to buy the Philippines and give it its independence. Carnegie was an interesting guy with a lot of money. Yeah, we have billionaires then. I don't know how billionaires today compare about that kind of giving money or caring about other people. And then William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan was completely opposed to imperialism. And that he kind of laid his entire foundation. He was going to run for president again. But the big thing was anti-taking the Philippines, the Treaty of Paris. And the reasons are complex. It's not going to be all Now, all what you might say it's more altruistic or caring about other people reasons. So like America, America represents self-determination. Let people decide their own fate, just like the United States did back in 1776. But it was also just blatant racism. Do we want these other people coming in, taking jobs? Are Filipinos going to become American citizens? Just like, remember, the United States conquered the West, and all those became states, with the 3 or 4 states in the Philippines. And so it was this kind of racialized element. So it's complex, isn't it? But also, people are going to make a lot of money. And it was that fear of corporations, which were already growing at that time, more corporate power and more war. Once you have an empire, you have war. Always. The United States, in some way, has been at war your entire life. Why? Empire. And here's a cartoon of that. Stop thief, it's the earth. And here's like a worker trying to stop this supposed to be corporations monopoly taking the. So these are the anti-imperialist living. And so they fought and they tried to encourage people, especially some progressive Republicans, but Democrats, to oppose. William Kenny Bryan is thinking, I'm going to run for president in 1900. This is kind of a done deal. So let's worry about this down the road. And Bryan will make a fateful decision. Bryan dropped his opposition to the treaty. Bryan dropped his opposition to the treaty. Everyone got that right? And the treaty ratified. That kind of gave enough, it gave cover for some Democrats, especially Southern Democrats who wanted this treaty, to sign the treaty. Bryan would sign it. Or Bryan would drop his opposition. He thought, it's a done deal, I'll worry about running again in 1900. This destroyed Bryan's chance to become president. It made him look like a hypocrite. And he never again would appeal, have that national appeal he had. He's still going to be one of the most important politicians in American history. Never had that appeal. And so he dropped that opposition. And this is actually kind of mocking them as he's supporting these savages from other places. Once again, very racialized. But he dropped his opposition. Everyone got this part? Dropping his opposition? Terrible move. I mean, it's one of these things where he just thought, oh, he just move on past it. And it was a disaster. He very well could have been elected in 1900. Now, I would eventually go on to become Secretary of State for Wilson, then resigned over World War I. We're not done with Bryan, but it's just one of these dumb moves politically. Well, there's a series of court cases from 1901 to 1903 that we lump together as the Insular cases. Think about island, insular means island. And it was basically, does the Constitution follow the flag? Meaning, do the Bill of Rights or the 14th Amendment, do they apply to these colonies? And here's another one of these pretty horrific cartoons, and that's supposed to be the Philippines. And now, are they going to be members of Congress? And this is kind of shocking what they would do. That was meant to be funny. But here's the big argument. Can you have a democracy in an empire? Can you have the people of the areas, Congress, decide their own fate, be sovereign, make their own minds up, have self-government? Is that allowed in an empire? And that was the question the United States had. Now, the United States has that empire. Remember, the United States conquered all the colonies, all of these areas here that would become territories and then states. You know, this is different. Did the United States allow democracy here? For the settlers, but not the people who lived there. In fact, the American Indians would not become citizens until 1921 in their own country. And so, what's the answer going to be? Will the United States allow democracy? And the answer is, of course not. The ruling would say that the Constitution does not follow the flag. Now, it does, but it doesn't now. There have been future cases that overturn part of it and not overturn part. It's a really gray area. But the insular cases are still precedent and law today. So the Filipinos will not have constitutional rights, or for that matter, Puerto Rico, even after they became citizens. But what about Cuba? So the United States said Cuba can be independent, but when are they going to be ready for independence? Who will decide that? Sam. The United States. The United States will decide that. So in 1903, in an appropriations bill, in addition to it called the Platt Amendment, the United States dictated to Cuba what's going to happen to them. Yeah, they'll be independent, but they'll become what's called a protectorate. They can make no treaties, trade, or any other kind of agreement with any other country in the world. In fact, every interaction they have with other countries will have to run through the United States. So Cuba will have no foreign policy that's not approved by the United States. Oh, and this is a cartoon showing it. And it's supposed to be that the United States is teaching them to be independent. So it's like a school child, there's Uncle Sam. Someday you'll be ready. Next, the US can intervene anytime in Cuba for American interests, which will be mostly for banks or for business. Intervene means send in the Navy or naval infantry, Marines. The Marines were a tiny little part of the United States Navy until this era, and they're going to become big. As an independent force that can invade countries like Nicaragua. That's why the Marines are going to become what the Marines are today. Then, of course, World War II, that'll be the perfect unit to do things like island hopping against the Japanese. Next, number 3. Cuba would have to lease a permanent naval base called Guantanamo Bay to the United States. Lease, meaning we're taking. It's on the eastern tip of Cuba. So it's basically this bay that not a lot was there. So the US would make a big naval base. So that's always telling Cuba, do what we want. We're right here. We are right here. And lastly, Cuba better not do anything that will hamper American banks. No excessive public spending or debt. They must always be able to pay back their bondholders. Remember, bonds are all countries borrow money. So here is a Cuban cartoon of the United States in Cuba. And that's Cuba, chained up, being branded by the United States. That gives the idea of what they think is going to happen. And there's going to be a lot of resentment that the United States will send in the Marines 4 different times. That's part of the reason why when the Cuban Revolution happened and an American-supported dictator named Batista was overthrown by a revolutionary movement led by Fidel Castro. Castro's going to have a lot of problems as a dictator of Cuba, but it stood up to America. That's going to mean a lot to this day in Cuba. One more thing about Guantanamo Bay. Remember the insular cases? Does the Constitution follow the flag to a naval base? Who knows? To the U.S. Maybe. I don't know. Things are confusing. So, after the September 11, 2001 attack, the United States, we didn't invade Afghanistan. We got involved in a civil war in Afghanistan. We picked one of the sides in the civil war and then didn't leave for 20 years. But we put in a government and we started looking for people that were responsible for the 9/11 attack. We didn't know anybody, so we put out about, we'll give you a reward, $5,000 or $10,000 if you can return it. You can give us the name of somebody who helped with the December 11th attack. So you can imagine what happened. Everyone started turning in people they didn't like. They just turning, and we also had thousands of these detainees didn't know what to do with them. Had no idea if they were anything. What do you do with them? Well, let's take them to a place. Not prisoners of war, because they have rights. Geneva Convention. We'll call them detainees. And we'll take them to a place where the Constitution is a gray area because of the insular cases. Where is that place? The naval base at Guantanamo Bay. And they made a prison. You remember this from Special Olympics?
It came up in the news.
What's that?
It came up in the news.
Oh, really? That's interesting how things kind of cycle around.
I know.
And it was detainees and incident cases. And why did they take them there? So the United States could do what to them? Torture. Torture. Now, as it turned out, the Supreme Court said, no, it's a naval base. So you're actually, but that's why they did it in 2001. And so that's why this naval base all of a sudden had this big enclosed fenced area, you know, became a prison. And we know what's happening right now. So they're rounding up people who are, some are documents, some are actually perfectly legal. As it's turned out, just a massive mob of people. They're not really looking very hard. And they created a camp there surrounded by barbed wire. Where they're going to keep. Reminds me of a camp like the Spanish. It's a curious thing happening there on Guantanamo Bay, right? I should say one more thing about the 9/11. So 9/11 took place at the Twin Towers, and there were thousands of firefighters, police officers, transit cops. You know, they all ran into the building. Many were killed. Those who weren't killed were caught up in this just toxic dust. I mean, it would be forever injured. I mean, it was just awful. And so they're going to help those who survived. They're going to help cause the rest of life. Their families, they lost loved ones. It's just awful. And so the United States government set this fund, but no support thing. Makes sense, right? Guess what was the cut off? The funding for that. I'll say about $30 million. Not very much. Yeah, so they got that off. I'm a little bit shocked by this. It's me watching what's going on and just kind of in awe. Yeah. Good luck going to a national park. So, who is this going to help? The creditors. And one thing we're doing American history, we can relate into today. This is one of the most dramatic times in our history happening. The most dramatic time in my lifetime is happening right now. And don't forget, I'm old. And you're young, so you can really. So, creditor. The big thing is these banks who loan Cuba money, they would send these the Marines in. So let me give you a couple examples of this down the road. Before we get to that, that's another, see, Cuba. Now look at how great Cuba's doing. But once again, look at these horrible caricatures. Kind of shocking. I really want to emphasize this to show the attitude that was pretty common amongst people who were, as they saw it, inferior races. And this would be used to justify this. This was such a racist time. Social Darwinism was everywhere. So, peace treaty signed. Did you see something a little bit contradictory of this headline? I don't know. You notice something a little odd about this? Peace treaty, awful slaughter. That's the new peace. Remember the Filipinos? They thought the United States was there to liberate them. They believed the United States would promote the values of the Declaration of Independence. Boy, would they be shocked when the first US troops would arrive after the Treaty of Paris, meaning from Montana, there to set up a colony. And that would trigger the Filipino insurrection. Fun with the English language. Philippines, PH. Filipino, F. I know. Fun with the English language. Yes, still part of the same thing. Now it's the Imperial Empire. Anybody know what that is? Those are Filipino civilians that were executed by American soldiers. Virtually everything that the United States would blame Spain for, give the justification for the war. The US would give as a justification, the US would do it. The US would do it all. That's what wars for empire are. These are bloody affairs to force them to completely submit. And they never did submit. So we try to justify it by saying we're spreading civilization and Christianity. Also commerce, we're going to make money. That was the big thing. So here's the idea of the world is watching. And McKinley, is McKinley going to allow the Philippines to go off the cliff and stay with Spain? It is our duty to bring civilization. But McKinley also said he had a dream. And when he woke up, he remembered the dream where it said that it's the duty of McKinley, of the United States, to spread Christianity to the Philippines. And so there's more than just commerce or civilization. We must bring them salvation. Now let's see. The Philippines have been a Spanish colony since the 16th century. Spain. Anybody want to guess what religion 90% of the Filipinos were after 300 years of Spanish rule? 90% were Catholic. And so what McKinley is saying, we're going to bring Christianity to the Christians. Yeah, they were Christians. Now, let me tell you one very quick thing about this. I didn't begin to say this. I'll tell you two reasons why. What did you say? Well, partially it'll make him sound like he's above just money. But I'll tell you the real reason. Yeah, he probably, he had no idea what religion. The other reason. What did most people in the United States know about it? So they can now become like a god, or like he's promoting this above himself. Because he just assumed most Americans had no idea. Did you know the religion in the Philippines? You did? No problem. I mean, I get it. Do you know what the largest Muslim country in the world is? It's right near the Philippines. Right there. So there's a large Muslim population in Mindanao, the big southern island. You know? Yeah. Little things like that. No, there's no problem not knowing it. But that's kind of a big deal, isn't it? Oh, yeah, okay, that kind of changes your view. Because what do most people think? If you think of Muslim, on my guess is you think where it started, Arabia. How about people spread? The second biggest is Pakistan. India's right there too. Huge Muslim populations. So, Turkey, Egypt are massive countries too, but not compared to Pakistan or Asia or India. So, Emilio Aguinaldo, who I'm having trouble saying this name for some reason, led the freedom fighters in the Philippines. Young lawyer, teacher, then lawyer, can't trust teachers. And that's what he looked like. Everyone catch his face. He's a national hero, as you can imagine, in the Philippines. He was fighting against the Spanish and then turned to lead a guerrilla war against the United States. And the Philippines, heavy jungle, mountains, really mountainous in the big island of Luzon. I know my little tiny map, the big island right there. Lots of mountains, very rugged. Heck, the last Japanese PO, or the last Japanese soldier to surrender, he was hiding in the mountains, but the surrender in the Philippines was in 1976. In the mountains for that long. But back to this. Eventually, 270,000 US troops will go to the Philippines. Remember, the US Army, when the war began, was only 28,000. This will be a bloody, bloody affair. And so many American soldiers would die. And imagine how difficult it would be to fight for American soldiers. Sent in, not really clear what you're fighting for, against an enemy that knows the countryside, that not wearing uniforms, they look like everybody else. They speak a different language, and they could be anywhere. And the Filipinos the same. What are these invading forces that we don't speak the same language, and they all look the same to us? And what the heck are they doing here? Here is a really, I think, a great cartoon, a really good one. The game that loses much to win little. And so it's supposed to represent the war. And here, McKinley and Ham. So I think it's kind of clever. Here's Uncle Sam. And this is Aguinaldo right here. Now there's this carnival game that was really popular. And it's pretty, well, the basic element of the game is this. You have a tent and there's a hole in the tent. And somebody will put their face through it and you would pay money to throw like eggs, rocks, manure, things like that. I'm trying to hit them in the face. It was almost always a black hole. It was just, so it was intensely racialized at that time. But anyways, that's all going on. He's sticking his face up and ducking. And look what Uncle Sam has called. Soldiers. And look at them dying. Because they can't get it. I think it's a really clever thing. Horrible game, but a clever app. So everyone, take one more look at Aguinaldo. Everyone see Aguinaldo? Look at how they draw him in a cartoon to mock him and to justify this war. Now that is directly from Jim Crow South. And it's a character that it's a horrifically racist way to refer to African-American women, and it was called picketing. Just unbelievable. That's what they draw Aguinaldo. Same thing here. But once again, to justify this, but to use that same racism that led to Jim Crow, use it for the Philippines. So the basic procedure of this war for 4 years, 1908, it basically ended. The war basically died down by 1903. I'll explain why in a second. Was ambushed by Filipino insurrections. You're using the jungle, and there's no prisoners taken in guerrilla war. Where do guerrillas keep prisoners? And a lot of them, their only weapons were things like machetes or axes. So they would hack them up. There would be just absolute anger and wanting revenge for your friends dying. And they would go to the nearest village and have a reprisal, meaning go through it and burn it down. This kind of happened in the Southern strategy. Remember the American Revolutionary War? And then repeat. How on earth did the soldiers survive it? So this is going to happen in almost every guerrilla war. If the Filipinos would have had a better source of weapons, they basically had to give whatever they could scrounge. Who knows how this war would have ended? But almost the exact same thing is going to happen just across the South China Sea in a place called South Vietnam. So, in one place called Hanyang, for example, and this was not uncommon, but this was the most famous. There was an ambush of an American squad, and 3 soldiers were just butchered by machete, just cut up. And you can imagine how just the anger when you find your friends like this. So General Jacob Smith, who's a Marine, these were Marines, but they're Army too. He ordered everybody over the age of 10, the nearest village of Hanyang, shot. The US soldiers lined up and shot them all. Fortunately, for a lot of the Filipinos, the American soldiers, think about putting people not much older than you. And 2 young adults are right there. In that stressful situation, people lose control. But they also don't want to just be murderers. So they also, when they got the order, they got as strong as they could. They wouldn't remember. And that allowed a lot of the villagers to escape. Still, they executed a lot. And this is going to make some magazines in the US. You can see the uniform. Some were wearing khaki. They started switching. Some were still wearing blue. This happened a number of times. This is empty. Well, the United States soon are going to realize they don't want any more of this war. There'll be more things coming on. Yeah.
Possibly read it before some.
Let me check email.
Okay.
It was a good. I got nothing. So to find out guerrillas, the United States is going to do. They're going to set up concentration camps, and they'll do torturing of. These are American soldiers torturing Filipino guerrillas. Yeah. How is this? They would spend a lot. I don't have anything. Hey.
Yeah.
Michigan,
You want?
give me something. Get out there, make sure someone is.
Okay,
Just
okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
leave it. Yeah, go. You're gonna go off and extort money from Russia.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
just want my cut.
Yeah.
So, what torture is this? It's water torture. But Israel in the 1980s, because it violated the UN treaty they signed, didn't want to call it torture, they started calling it law. That's what it's all thing. That's American soldiers do. It even made the brand new magazine, Life magazine. So, eventually though, President Roosevelt realized by 1902, new president, this was not going well. And so, he would appoint, and Taft didn't want to do it, but William Howard Taft became the provisional governor of the Philippines, colony. And Taft worked as hard as he could to get peace. And that's William Howard Taft. TR is for Teddy Roosevelt. He liked going by his initials. His cousin, Franklin Roosevelt, would do the same thing, FDR. And then everyone copied FDR, JFK, LBJ, for a while at least. And of course, if you're going to say, well, if you have a picture of Taft as governor of the Philippines, then of course I show you one riding a water buffalo, because I had to. But Aguinaldo was lured into a trap and they captured him. And that would lead to a peace agreement. And also kind of the end of colonial imperialism in the US. Then that's Aguinaldo captured, and Aguinaldo would agree to end the bloodshed, because he wanted this over too. The United States would allow the Philippines to have self-rule, their own parliament in Manila, and become independent on July 4th, 1946, which is their Independence Day. And even though it's still going to be an American colony, Japan is going to take this colony in 42. The US will take it back in 44, 45. They still gave the independence in 46. But as you can imagine, it is a complex history between the Philippines and Americans. As you can imagine. Heck, for 20 years, the US effectively kicked out like US military bases out of the Philippines. Now they're kind of coming back. There's the issue of China and South side of China Sea. So all kinds of stuff's going on. The world's complex. Of course, we're losing allies, so we'll see where this goes. What's the price of empire? The United States would have 5,000 men killed and 5 times that number. So significantly more than the one died in the Spanish-American War. Over 20,000 Filipino guerrillas and 250,000 civilians. And about almost half of those would die because of a cholera epidemic that would be triggered by the war. You lose your good sources of water, tainted water, fecal matter in water. Oh. This was a bloodbath. And that's when the United States would decide no more colonial imperialism. But during the war, at least in the first year and a half, the Army, the military, the War Department was able to keep this effectively away from US newspapers. So it did not taint this horrible war with the election of 1900. And McKinley's going to run for re-election. And it says here, the American flag has not been planted in foreign soil.
Sitting on the desk. And I forgot my water.
Thank you. But for humanity's sake, see you tomorrow. For humanity's sake. So they can imply that the war was purely for humanity's sake. But there's something you might notice here. Who's that? Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt took the fame of the Rough Riders to become governor of New York. Then as governor of New York, he was a Republican, but he infuriated Marcus Hanna because he was a progressive Republican and believed in antitrust. Remember antitrust, anti-monopoly. He wanted regulation of big business. He also wanted workers' rights. He was relatively pro-union. He was nothing at all like the conservative laissez-faire Republicans that dominated the party. Marcus Hanna did not want this guy as governor of at that time, the richest, most industrialized, and biggest state in the Union. So make him vice president. What do vice presidents do? Break ties in the Senate and wait for the president to die. Roosevelt was so young, he jumped at the chance. And McKinley and Hanna's like, got rid of him. That's like going to purgatory. He's done. William Jennings Bryan would run again. There's a picture of Bryan. And Bryan was still really popular, but could never get the popularity in the North. He's giving one, here's a speech he's giving, this kind of likes it, but when the election finally happened, McKinley won. Bryan could never make inroads in the northern industrial workers. It still seemed too much like this evangelical Protestant thing. And for that same reason, didn't hit here, where it seemed more southern, even though it wasn't. Bryan lost some of his popularity. Those Montana went for Bryan. But then, just a few months after that, McKinley was in Buffalo, New York, for this big North American exhibition. He was gonna like reach halfway across the border with Canada and shake hands with their premier, and he was assassinated. William McKinley was assassinated on September 6, 1901, by an anarchist, an immigrant from what is now Bulgaria. It was Bulgaria, what am I saying? Leon Zhagosk. Zhagosk was this also fueled nativism, as you can imagine. Zhagosk thought this would trigger an anarchist revolt. It did not. Now, after Garfield was assassinated, they started using the federal police that was responsible for finding counterfeiters to start guard the president because they had nobody else, so they picked them. We call them the Secret Service. So there were a few guards, not really well trained, but with them. But they clearly were not very effective here. And this picture is actually kind of humorous. So Zhagosk had a black powder pistol, revolver, wrapped in a handkerchief, and walked up to him. He was going to be in a handshake he wanted, pulled it out, shot him in the gut. This guy. Doesn't it look like he's using McKinley as a shield? That's really not the job of the Secret Service. I'll use the president as a shield from your gun. So that one always makes me laugh. Zhagosk was promptly arrested. There's him in prison. And he would be assassinated in a week. Did I say assassinated? Executed. One thing. Killing the president was not a federal crime. That was just a state crime in New York City of murder. He was convicted of a capital offense in the state. Trying to assassinate or attempted assassination of the president would not become a federal crime until after Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. And that created a big stir about the body in 1963. So, almost forgot, Teddy Roosevelt, now as president, or using the immortal words. The immortal words of Marcus Hanna. And now that damned cowboy is in the White House. The whole goal was to hide Roosevelt, and now he's president. So, Roosevelt's foreign policy would be called Big Stick. He would take kind of a bastardization of a West African saying. There's a lot of these sayings like this. No one's even sure how he got it, where it really came from, but speak softly. Ask diplomacy, but carry a big stick. And this shows pretty clear what the big stick is. The Navy. What's that? Oh. So, a couple things about this. I like the big stick cartoon. Has the Navy, and it says peace, but also debt collection, those bonds. That's the Navy. And seen like the Caribbean, and then Santo Domingo, which is today the Dominican Republic, all the way around to Mexico, Venezuela, Panama. We kind of saw this as our body of water. One more thing. I could scoop up an island on its own. Pelicans were massive back then. If you ever see a pelican close, you can see why birds are dinosaurs. They are prehistoric looking things. So, it's also sometimes called gumbo diplomacy, but what it is economic imperialism. So now we just take over the economies of weaker countries, control them, dominate them for the economic gain of some corporations and banks. I about said R, but it's not R as the United States. It's certain companies and therefore their stockholders. Roosevelt was a curious man. He believed in breaking up a lot of monopolies. At the same time, he wanted corporate power. He's like a lot of contradictions. So, after an event happened about Germany trying to collect the debt in Venezuela, Roosevelt would dust off the old Monroe Doctrine. Remember the Monroe Doctrine, no European intervention in the Western Hemisphere, which is kind of a doctrine. and add to it. In addition, it's called a corollary. So everybody write down the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And then the part in italics, that is from it. So as soon as you write that down, read it. What does it mean? You write it down. One more thing. Yeah. Good. What does it say? That what can the United States do? What does it say the US can do anywhere in the Western Hemisphere? Let's be clear. Hemisphere. What can the US do? According to that. And this is not a law. This is Roosevelt. He didn't give the speech. He just issued this document. Yeah. And who deems it necessary? He. Specifically, what person? The president. Roosevelt. So what it says is this: the US can intervene anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. We will be the international police force, and we will decide chronic wrongdoing. Anybody want to guess what the chronic wrongdoing will be? Better pay back your bonds. You better pay back your debt to American banks. But that is a Roosevelt corollary. Now, here's a cartoon implying that it's American forces protecting this little Venezuela from European creditors. That's not what's going to happen. The creditors more and more are going to be the big banks from New York City, the Wall Street banks. Wall Street is where the stock market is, and the big investment banks are the ones loaning them money. The first place it's going to happen will be, we're jumping right in here, the Dominican Republic, 1904. So they went default on their bonds. Remember bonds, countries issue bonds, people, banks buy them. That's how countries borrow money. US banks had bought almost half of their bonds, and a few European powers. They're banks. Well, the banks, now let's be clear about it. If a bank loans money to somebody, person, corporation, country, that is what we call a business decision. Sometimes business decisions work out well, sometimes they don't. Companies go out of business all the time. I'm telling you something you all know. The banks made a business decision to loan money to the unstable dictatorship of the Dominican Republic. Everyone still called it Santo Domingo, but soon it'll be Dominican Republic. Make a business decision, lost money. Now, why would they loan money to Dominican Republic? They could get really high interest rates because they got basically bad credit. So they made a bad business decision and lost money. Happens all the time. But what did the banks do? They went to President Roosevelt and said, what? Exactly. We want our money. We want our money. And what did Roosevelt do? Here come the Marines. They sent in the US Navy and they sent in Marines to occupy the country. They occupied Santo Domingo. Now, this US cartoon tries to present this as the United States protecting poor little Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, from European creditors. But that's not what happened at all. The Marines came in and the staff basically took over the government, took over their entire tax system, raised taxes on peasants, and said 55% of the Dominican Republic revenues has to go to the creditors. And who are the first creditors to be paid? US banks. What a great move by banks. I mean, think about it. If you're a bank, you can make a risky loan. If they pay it back with high interest, you clean up. If they don't pay it back, you send in the Marines. Imagine having a business where you never lose. You never lose. There's no risk. Huh? We'll call it a monopoly. And so what happened? You think, well, first off, what does this tell every country in the Caribbean? You better pay back your bonds to US banks where the Marines are coming. And secondly, what does it tell banks? Loan money like mad. It's a free-for-all. That's what happened. Banks started loaning money to all these countries, aka buy their bonds, all over. They would encourage them. Make really dangerous, risky loans. But they always knew that they'd get their money back, because if they didn't, the Marines would be sent in. And debt would become a weapon to control. Trust me, we will find that out. How debt is a weapon of control. Buy a house, and you'll know how debt becomes a weapon of control. You can't, you have a job you don't like, can't leave it, but you gotta pay back your mortgage. House is a big deal. Debt. So there's a name for this. It's called moral hazard. Moral hazard is by a policy or an action encourages people to do something that would be seen as corrupt, seen as fraud. But this encourages it, doesn't it? It's encouraging banks to make these risky loans. Moral hazard. This happens all the time. I'll give you an example. If somebody lets you get away with something, this has never happened here because we would never take advantage of this. But just imagine somebody lets you get away with something. What does that encourage you to do? Do it again. Do it again. Now you would never do it because you're honorable people. Out there, people take advantage of you. Let me rephrase that. Every one of us has done that, right? We've all done it. We all know.
And I'll do it again.
Yeah. And sometimes it's easier not to confront somebody, so they let them get away. So, big stick diplomacy would be economic imperialism, and the number one person they would support would be the banks. We would intervene time after time in Latin America. We, as in our military of the United States, for banks, but also for corporations. The biggest corporation is going to be United Fruit. United Fruit will soon dominate Central America and take up much of the arable land from Guatemala all the way down to Panama. And I think you can guess what fruit United Fruit. It was all fruits, but can we guess? It could be anything. And they really publicized the banana boat. In fact, you ever heard the term banana republics? The banana republics was a name that was given to these countries back in around 1920, Central America. Not because they grew bananas, but because the banana company ran the countries. They called them the octopus, and they ran everything, controlled most of the arable land. Most of the peasants were working for, or were basically like almost indentured servants for them. They got so big by the 1960s. United Fruit, which marketed their bananas under the name Chiquita, and still do. But the banana I had was in Dole, the Dole Corporation. They actually made a banana-shaped satellite that went around the Earth, beaming banana-related propaganda to all of us. And it worked. I don't even like bananas, but every day I have a banana. I actually really like bananas. Who likes bananas? Who doesn't like bananas? Who's scared of food? There's a few of us. Okay, good. This is the United States will intervene in Nicaragua many times for this, but also mining and agricultural affairs. But one thing to add. So basic diplomacy, economic imperialism. Do countries carrying out economic imperialism, aka the United States and Central America and South America, do we want democracies in these countries, or do we want dictatorships? We want dictatorships. Because if it's democracy, the people might vote for things like not allowing United Fruit to take their land. So we want dictatorships. The mass of dictators the United States will promote in Latin America is going to be infamous. The Somoza family in Nicaragua is going to be huge. Speaking of that, let me show you Nicaragua. Nicaragua would be 4 different times the US would occupy it. Those are Marines in Managua, the capital, in 1924. And do you catch what they're posing with? They know exactly what they're doing. It's a dark joke. They know they've come down there to loot the treasury, to send it back. Oh, one more thing. What kind of pants are these? Oh, yeah. What kind of pants? Anyone know? These are called Japurs. They're cavalry, but they didn't have horses. Those are riding pants. Tomorrow, finish up a little bit more of this. We got to talk about Mexico. There's so many things, but it's amazing time. The Philippines, that's a tough one. I'm checking the weather. It says it's supposed to get up to 22 today. It's 9 people. Banana Bell.
The one that's over there.
We're not, yeah, right there.
I saw that.
There were a bunch of those made too, like during the golf or the thing.
Yeah. I saw that one and I felt like that felt pretty irrelevant.
Castle outs are the deadliest cars ever made. Oh. Clear out. I forgot to turn it in when you asked for it. That's pretty funny, but give me. All right. Thank you. Shot cameras. Such a weird.
Oh, why?